Hello and welcome to another episode of With Enough Prep Time. I'm your host, the Nerd Man, and I'm coming to you today to just do basically a kind of reaction where I've of the recent video by Jody's Corner exposing his source on certain things regarding Ray Fisher and in fact Zack Snyder. Now, obviously, Jody himself has had a lot of proven it's fact. He's had a lot of interactions with certain people who are deeply embedded within the DCEU, including Patty Jenkins. I'm not gonna lie, I've watched the video already. There were some certain things within the video that I just wanted to react to because I think they are so poignant about the state of the DCEU and the division, the actual division that is there in the DCEU fandom at the moment and what is causing that division, right? So I want to get to the root of it. Now, a lot of the time people do these videos and it's like this big dramatic expose, and to be fair, I had always thought certain things about Ray Fisher's accusations in regard to Zack Snyder way before this video came out. So I'm gonna react to it, to certain aspects of it, and I want to react to certain aspects of the Snyder fan base, who are a devoted fan base, and some of what the issues, what the division, because I think the real problem here, and this is including myself, I can criticize myself in this, is there's some cognitive dissonance between perceptions of films and what is being said, about these films of Zack Snyder and why they're problematic. And I think everyone seems to accept, like I'm a Patty Jenkins fan. I'm a fan of the guy who did the last Shazam movie. I'm a fan of Christopher Nolan, but I'm not a fanboy. I can admit that they've done one of my favorite films of all time, but then at the same time say, well, that's bullshit. Wonder Woman literally is one of my favorite origin comic book movies of all time. I think it may even crack my top 15 comic book movies, right? So I'm a fan of Patty Jenkins and what she did there. But I admit Wonder Woman 1984 is a disappointing movie. And I'm willing to listen to anybody who says, hey, this is a disappointing movie and this is why. I'm a fan of Watchmen and Dawn of the Dead, but I'm willing to say Man of Steel and BVS are disappointing movies, and this is why. So I find this is where I think there's the switch in Zack Snyder fans' heads that I'm going to go into, where there's an inability to accept certain realities of the problems of Zack Snyder movies. And yet, I would say, oh, I'm a hypocrite if I couldn't see, there's recently been some Marilyn Manson, which I'm going to do a video on, some allegations against Marilyn Manson, Armie Hammer, both actors that I like, and then Evan Rachel Wood, another actress that I like, and there's a whole kind of mix of things. But I can be objective and say, look, I like this person, but maybe they've done some terrible or bad things. You don't have to be a devoted fan to an individual the whole time. And this comes in the wake of some, classic Zack Snyder commentary, very, very aggressive, in which he talked about what he feels should be done to people who denounce it or do not like his movies. So anyway, let me react to a bit. I'm going to react to the beginning and the end of what Jody says in his video. And I'm going to try and keep this tight and snug. I don't want this to be too long. So let's start off with his with the video from here.
And it still was polarizing. Made $668 million box office.
Very true.
Relatively okay, but also relatively disappointing. It didn't live up to their expectations. So that's one failure. And the critics so on that.
So he's talking about Man of Steel, and he's talking about the critical reception to Man of Steel and the critical reception to Zack Snyder's movies. Now, I'll talk after he's said what.
Still, BVS comes out. How is it that you get a movie with the actual Trinity in it, with Batman, Superman, and Wonder Woman, not to mention Lex Luthor and Doomsday, with a dead Zod cameo, and it doesn't even crack 900 million? Ladies and gentlemen, Batman versus Superman, the film that has never been seen and is one of the nerds' most iconic come shots of time, couldn't make $1 billion in the box office. When that same year, a couple later, Captain America: Civil War passes up BVS with the threshold, and they didn't even do their heroes right, because Civil War, that wasn't even the Civil War story. They didn't even have half the character.
Okay, so I want to start from here, okay, because and I'm going to start with a critical response, because I think Jody's doing a very good job of like breaking this down right now. All right, so I'm going to start with a critical point, which is he's comparing, Captain America: Civil War with Batman v Superman, and the obvious answer to why Civil War made more money is, it has the introduction of Spider-Man, although who at the time has more, because you could say, well, BVS has the introduction of Wonder Woman, right? So that should counteract Spider-Man, and it has the introduction of Flash, and it has the introduction of these kind of characters. The only difference there, because I don't think Civil War introduced Spider-Man better than it introduced Wonder Woman, or than BVS introduced Wonder Woman. The only difference there is that Spider-Man is this, already proved. It was a proved, basically there had already been exposure in the public imagination to Spider-Man. Okay, so in terms of the general public, right, they had an idea of Spider-Man, so there was an excitement to Spider-Man coming to the MCU. Of course, there was excitement in Wonder Woman, obviously, becoming, being in BVS. But I'd say the most exciting thing about BVS and the selling point was much more Superman facing Batman, right? The selling point of the Civil War was actually Spider-Man coming into the MCU, much more than it was Captain America versus Iron Man, right? So there's that, okay? The MCU had been an established universe by then, in which critics were just overwhelmingly positive about the MCU, which I'm going to talk about later. And then BVS was only the second movie in this kind of shared universe of movies for the DCEU. So you could say, well, there you go. There's an inbuilt excuse, and that Warner Brothers probably had too high expectations for such a new franchise. But I would argue, no, actually, Jody's very, very much correct in this, and that the failure of BVS was something that should have been a huge. The failure of Man of Steel should have been a huge warning sign to Warner Brothers that they've got the wrong person leading the march for these DC movies, right? Now, why do I say that? Because just recently, they've had a Batman trilogy, and the Batman trilogy made over $1 billion with the Nolan movies in the second and third movie, right? So if Man of Steel didn't generate the excitement that Batman Begins did, so that people were like, oh, I've got to see this sequel, then there's a problem there. Second problem is, and this is a really, really big one, which really fucks up this argument, is the opening weekend of BVS was massive. absolutely huge. It had the kind of opening weekend that billion-dollar movies have, right? It had that. I'm sure if I'd love to look up a comparison between Aquaman and BVS, because I'm pretty sure BVS had a bigger opening than Aquaman. I'm not gonna, don't hold me to that, okay? But I just want to, say that the amount of money BVS made in the first weekend of its opening, right, was enough that it should, if things had have gone well, from in the subsequent weeks, it should have breezed to $1 billion. It shouldn't have struggled to $1 billion with where it was at. So there's that. Now, I want to just go into two major reasons that I see that Man of Steel and BVS underperformed, as Jody is going to kind of put out. But I'm going to give an extra added dimension to why these two movies failed. So one, I think, and this is very, very true to me, I think that the critics were very, very unfair on the DCEU movies, and particularly they were unfair on the tone of the DCEU movies. So a lot of the criticism coming from the critical community was about the dark nature of the DC movies. They weren't talking about the dialogue, the script, the plot holes, the mischaracterization of certain characters. All they kept banging on about was how dark these movies were. And I don't think that was the problem at all. It wasn't that they needed to do exactly what the MCU did. Why do we know this? Because we just had Batman Begins and The Dark Knight, right? I do think that the Man of Steel was too humorless. I think there was only one joke in Man of Steel, whereas if you compare that to Batman Begins, there's quite a few humorous moments in Batman Begins, and there's quite a few humorous moments of levity in The Dark Knight, even though they're darker tone movies, right? They still have time to have a few, like, hey, what do you want that, when Bruce Wayne is driving the Batmobile for the first time and it's not black, and you almost know what he's going to say. And his, Lucian Fox says, "What do you think?" And he says, "Does it come in black?" And it's like a little wink to the audience. And it's a great little scene because we knew that and we wanted him to say that. It's a cool little moment. There's none of that in Man of Steel. Okay? So first of all, I want to mention that the critics were too hard on the dark tone. I got what they meant, but they should have been very, very clear. And Warner Brothers should have been nuanced enough to understand what this critique meant. It didn't mean that movies of that tone can't be successful and that the zeitgeist had moved on from the Dark Knight era. So how do we know now that the zeitgeist hasn't moved on from the Dark Knight era and that movies with a more mature tone can be successful, both critically and commercially? Let's go to the Wolverine movie, Logan. Not one of my favorite movies, but certainly a dark in tone, somber movie with a very, very fantastical hero who isn't Batman. So again, you get a dark movie that can be quite successful critically and and commercially. And now, how do we know that? Because the critics gave Logan a very, very high score. Now, how do we know that they are unfair on the DCEU or DC movies when they do this? Because, and that, audiences don't necessarily have to agree with critics when it comes to the dark tone of these movies, right? So with Man of Steel and of course with Batman v Superman, you have an alignment between what the critics and the audience are saying. There's not, with Man of Steel, the audiences are a little bit more forgiving, a little bit more positive. And I think there was good reason that you could be a little bit more positive towards Man of Steel. The reason you could be a bit more positive towards it is because despite its mistakes, it had a sequel. You know, we didn't know that sequel was going to be BVS at the time. It had a sequel in which it could correct those said mistakes. So, you know, in that sense, you know, you could be a little bit more positive. You could say, hey, you know, Clark Kent and Superman were a little bit dark. I would have liked them to be a little bit more optimistic, a little bit more like Superman that we recognize from the comics and from movies and stuff like that, and from cartoons. But you know, all in all, I think it's a good enough starting point. So the audience, you know, the audience reception was a little bit more fair to Man of Steel than I think the critics' reception was. BVS kind of falls off a cliff, doubles down on the Superman darkness. We'll go into that later because I don't want this video to go on too long. Then we have one more kind of area that is really, really kind of important and highlights just how out of touch these critics are. We are living in a generation that loves Game of Thrones, that loves Breaking Bad, that loves all of these kind of things. But all of a sudden you think that everybody just wants lighthearted, funny, forced humor, MCU comic book movies. Now, I like those comic book movies. I think they're cool for what they are, right? But I much prefer more serious takes on these comic book properties. That's what my preference. I like Judge Dredd and stuff like that, or the new Dredd movie. Now, what do the critics say about Joker, another DC movie? Oh, it's too dark. Oh, it's too cynical. Oh, it's too this. Wait a second. Wasn't Logan too cynical? Wasn't Logan? This is about an X-Man with claws and who heals super fast, right? Like, shouldn't that be all pulpy and fun and energetic and whatever? Why are you like ragging on DC movies every time they go dark? Why is it that DC movies have to follow the same formula as MCU movies, and then when they do that, like in Justice League, you then critique them for copying Marvel? So it's a complete kind of, the critics basically got Warner Brothers into a complete headspin about what to do with the tone of their universe. But here's the thing, and here's the difference between Joker and the Zack Snyder movies. The audience stuck up for Joker. The audience said, you know what? Fuck you, critics. We like this movie. We're going to go back and watch it, and we're going to take friends to go and watch it, and we're going to do repeat viewings. This movie is going to be a success. Damn the critics or not. They did not do that for Man of Steel and BVS. Once was enough. Man of Steel had a fucking fantastic opening as well. Really big opening. It opened big globally. Bigger than Wonder Woman. Bigger than Suicide Squad, I believe. Opened massive. So there was interest in Superman. There was interest in a realistic take on Superman. They just didn't like Zack Snyder's movie enough to have the repeat viewing. It was a 50-50 split, maybe 60-40. 60% of people liked it. 40% of people were like, not my Superman, right? Or I never really liked Superman, and this movie hasn't changed my mind. Or, you know, there's something missing in this movie for me. Don't feel like taking, you know, a girlfriend on a date to this movie. Don't feel like going with my buddies to go watch this movie again. I don't feel like repeating this experience. Same thing happened with BVS. I liked that movie. I went, like, there's a channel that I have called With Enough Prep Time where I do a massive discussion on BVS as a movie, and where I think it was really good, like a graphic novel brought to life. And I even liked the theatrical version of that movie. However, having said that, We have the same problem. Something missing in the movie, not an experience people want to revisit again and again. So there we go. That's what I wanted to talk about in terms of the difference between a DC movie that gets ragged on by critics like the Joker did, but that is so good that it is resilient. It's critic proof. Opened big, had massive legs. I think it opened smaller Joker than BVS, or it opened with it opened smaller. It didn't have as big an opening as BVS or Man of Steel, but people just kept taking their friends to watch it. They thought it was a good movie. So there we go. Let's go on to the rest of this.
That pissed Warner Brothers off tremendously, and it pissed me off, and it pissed a lot of other fans off. To know that you can only $886 million or whatever it is, that Batman and Superman movie should have cracked $2 billion just off GP. Just off principle, it should have made that money, but it didn't. It was a huge flop. Critically, probably even worse. They didn't like it. It was panned. Then we had Suicide Squad, which is another heavily produced Zack Snyder project. He was more heavily involved with that than Wonder Woman, of course.
Okay.
David Ayer.
I wanted to talk about this because a lot of people. So one of the people that the Snyder cult has targeted very, very massively is in fact Patty Jenkins. Now I want to transport you back in time because the Snyder fans, the Zack Snyder fans, are very, very they're very picky. They like to pick and choose with their. And please, by the way, like, subscribe if you like the content. If you want to, please, and also comment because I want to know what you think about the analysis. So the Snyder fans like to take Wonder Woman now as one of theirs. It's one of Zack Snyder's movies because he produced it. He has a story credit on that movie, right? And I'm going to link you to this interview with Alan Heinberg, the writer of the movie, and he discusses exactly how the Wonder Woman movie was developed and exactly why Zack Snyder got a story credit. Zack Snyder was working with another writer, I think his name is Alan Fugue or something, on a Wonder Woman movie prior to Alan Heinberg being brought on board. That movie that he was working on is the movie where you see Wonder Woman with a bunch of severed heads. Now, I don't know what that movie would have been. Maybe it would have been an excellent movie and I would have liked it, despite not particularly liking that image of Wonder Woman with severed heads. That's not how I see the character. And what her values are and what she stands for. But hey, who knows? It might have been a kick-ass movie somehow. And I'll always say this. I am willing to separate my fan, for instance, Joaquin Phoenix is not my Joker, but I like that movie. It's a good movie. Aspects of Shazam are not my Shazam. I like Shazam being, he should be a 12-year-old. Younger. He shouldn't be this like snarky teenager. So aspects of that movie don't play to how I feel I would present the character. But still, I like that movie. Superman, Man of Steel, doesn't present the character of Superman in a way that I enjoy. And I don't think it improves or does anything new or interesting enough with Superman to justify changing him in the way it does. So, back to Patty Jenkins. I'm going to say this very, very quickly. Zack Snyder was doing the story of Wonder Woman. Jeff Johns came in and he said, hey, Zack, I've got this friend of mine, Alan Heinberg, who did a comic run on Wonder Woman, and he's also a very good television stroke screenwriter. He's got a very good voice, very good, writing style. How about we bring him in, to voice what he thinks this Wonder Woman movie should be? He comes in, Alan Heinberg comes in, pitches the Wonder Woman movie to Zack Snyder. Then Jeff Johns, Zack Snyder's like, hey, I really like this. Zack Snyder was basically the Kevin Feige of the studio at the time. Zack Snyder was like, hey, I like this. Good on him. He knew that his idea was not as good as this guy's idea. So Zack Snyder says, hey, you know what? We're going to do your movie. He goes outside, gives Alan Heinberg the news. Can you come and see us tomorrow? Let's map this story out. Jeff Johns, Zack Snyder, and Alan Heinberg sat in a room for one day and mapped out a story that they were both happy with, like just on a whiteboard, right? Then what happens is after they've done that, basically Zack Snyder comes in and he says, hey, you know what? I want you to write up a treatment. We're gonna, to Alan Heinberg, write up a treatment of what we did. And then we're going to go to the studio and pitch this idea. They write up the treatment. And then Alan Heinberg, this is the great thing about this, Alan Heinberg was never even given full, this is his movie now. In fact, there were several other writers who were doing competing versions of the movie that Alan Heinberg came up with, right? So Alan Heinberg goes on to do the treatment, write the script, everything. So that story credit that Zack Snyder has comes from that one day that he spent, or one or two, I think it may have been maybe 1, 2, 3 days that he spent just, spitballing ideas with Alan Heinberg. After that 3 days period, the rest of the several weeks, months, years of the development of the Wonder Woman script was done by Alan Heinberg, Patty Jenkins, and Jeff Johns. In fact, here's the beauty of it. To show Patty Jenkins and Jeff Johns had a lot more to do with that script, despite how terrible the Wonder Woman 1984 script is. Sometimes people do one thing good, sometimes they do another thing bad. But Alan Heinberg basically comes in, right? And you can check this all in the video by Alan Heinberg. I wish I had have brought it up as well, where he discusses it. Alan Heinberg finished the script and wasn't even on set one day, not one single day, while the Wonder Woman movie was filming. And while the Wonder Woman movie was filming, the people who were on set, the writers who were on set, was Patty Jenkins and Jeff Johns. Now, what I would say is clearly, looking at Wonder Woman 1984 and looking at Wonder Woman, the movie, is that Patty Jenkins is not a writer. She is a rewriter. And Jeff Johns is a comic book writer. He's not a screenplay writer. So what Jeff Johns and Patty Jenkins infused is basically they had a good story, a good dialogue to work off. And then they were just like, oh, yeah, this will improve it. This will improve it. And that's where you get the Wonder Woman movie, right? But the story credit given to Zack Snyder was merely just you helped in the beginning. And, just so that you started off, figuring out this story with the other writer, even though we've completely changed the story now. We'll give you a story credit. Zack Snyder was not responsible. Yet, the Snyder fans want to make it out like the reason that the Wonder Woman succeeded, the first Wonder Woman succeeded. And it's such a spit in the face to Patty Jenkins and Alan Heinberg. The reason that Wonder Woman 1 was so good was because of Zack Snyder and Zack Snyder's influence on the movie. And if it wasn't for Zack Snyder, then that movie, would have been no. The difference is it's completely a different series of events that led to the creation of Wonder Woman 1. Did Zack Snyder have a helping hand? A little bit. But he wasn't the main player. And if you look at it, looking at Man of Steel and BVS, suggesting that Zack Snyder helping to write Wonder Woman 84 would have improved the film and would have made it a much more universally liked film is highly fanciful, delusional, and just means you're out of touch with reality, right? But so I want to say this because a lot of people will be like, oh, Jody is trying to make it out like, distance Zack Snyder from, from the fact that he produced Wonder Woman. He produced, Suicide Squad, but he wasn't that involved with the creation and writing of Suicide Squad. No one says that. I love the way everyone's like, oh, he was responsible. He was totally responsible for Wonder Woman just because he's a producer and he has a story credit. No one says that about Suicide Squad. No one goes, oh, Zack Snyder. Why? Because it was a bit of a failure in terms of critically. People loved it. There was an audience for the Suicide Squad, and I think it succeeded in ways that Zack Snyder's movies actually didn't, which is why I don't understand why Warner Brothers went away from that tone. So let's get that. I'm going to skip ahead after a while after he finishes this point so that I can respond to the next point and then get to the big meat of the story.
Flop that joint up. He said F Marvel. Then he said, oh, but yeah, my movie sucks, whatever. Then we got a different air cut. Then we got a rated R extended cut. It's weird. That didn't work. Wonder Woman saved the day because I put my entire channel on that movie, and I knew that movie was going to be great because I believed in Patty. I knew about Patty's talent. I believed in her. I believed in her eye and her vision, and I put my channel on the line to defend her when people were telling me I was crazy. It worked. Wonder Woman was the only single film of the DC universe that actually worked. And lo and behold, it's the one movie that doesn't look anything like a Snyderverse film. Now, why could...
So I don't agree with this. I think there's, and you might say that, oh, look, I'm contradicting myself here. Because I'm going to say, actually, it does look like a Snyder film. It looks like a Snyder film done well. That's what Wonder Woman is to me. It is close to what Snyder thinks he's trying to do, but done well. And what do I mean by that? Shazam is not like a Snyder film at all. I'll just make this up. But I'm going to use Shazam, I'm going to use Wonder Woman, and I'm going to use Joker as movies that stick somewhat to the philosophy of Zack Snyder and Nolan, but mix it up and give their own flavor, their own, they have their own identity. Now, Man of Steel and BVS was trying to be Nolan. Let's not pretend, especially Man of Steel was trying to be what Nolan would do if he did Superman, right? And that was the whole thing. It was a mold by copy, even to the fact of the way the thing was narrated. Like you'd have in Man of Steel these flashbacks and then coming back to the present day. Flashback, come back to the present day, right? Now, why I would say that I'm using these three movies of Joker, Wonder Woman, and Shazam as examples of DC done right, and also kind of in the spirit of what Zack Snyder was doing, but doing wrong. So why I disagree with Jody here is because what it did was put these fantastical characters in scenarios that we in modern 21st century, human beings in our world understand, right? The technology isn't like in the MCU where you've got hovercrafts and, in World War II, people shooting lasers and stuff like that. The Wonder Woman in the Wonder Woman movie is in a realistic depiction of World War I. Yes, there's some camp, There's some, a little bit of humor here and there. But all in all, that is a much more realistic World War One than Captain America is in its depiction of World War II, which means that when she does something in that world, it means so much more to us because she's actually fighting in World War One, a true human event that actually happened to us. Same with, a lot of Marvel movies like the Spider-Man movie, right? The Spider-Man franchise does not exist in a universe, in the MCU Spider-Man exists in a universe that is recognizable as a one-to-one match for our world, right? It's kind of, it's bizarre. It's got this technology. It's got, secret government agencies. It's awesome. Don't get me wrong. I love it. It's the MCU. It's awesome. That's what they're doing, right? They've got like this big, mythos and world where it's kind of like a completely weird alternative world. Whereas you look at Shazam, yeah, the character and the magic and all of that, it's a little bit weird, but it's grounded in a real human thing that happens. People get fostered, and their mothers, run away, and their fathers go to prison, and they're damaged by that. And that's what Billy is in that movie. He's a kid that's damaged, that is searching for family. That is truly relatable, and it's not done in like, oh, this is some sci-fi family. This is a real family in the real world. It just happens to be that Shazam is hanging out and interacting with this real world kind of, foster family, right? And yes, there's a little bit of humor and whatever, and it's not quite as, grim and dark as perhaps our world can get at the moment. But there's some, there's some realism there, right? Joker's super, let's take the Joker and put him in the 80s, in a realistic 80s, and the world's gone, that's really dark and gritty, and the world's gone and you recognize the problems that the Joker is dealing with in that Joker movie are serious problems of mental health issues, all of this kind of stuff. You don't have that in the MCU. And that is why those movies work. Because they don't necessarily betray the characters completely. They have their own flavor. They don't just try and be a direct copy of the Nolan model, but they deal with real world issues the way that Nolan dealt with real world issues. Now, what is the difference between Zack Snyder's movies and why don't they work? It's hard to say, because Snyder's movies also deal with real world issues, right? But I can say one thing, that when DC gets those real world grounded issues right, and it does the same kind of thing in Aquaman, the technology in the Aquaman world is very similar to our own, the world is very similar to our own. Of course, they've got all the undersea Atlantis stuff, but they've put Aquaman somewhat in a, it's less so, but it's somewhat in a kind of realm of realism. But I say Aquaman is much more the kind of DC movie that I would personally critique as of recent. Because what DC did with their other movies in this franchise, Suicide Squad, aside from that, because Suicide Squad again has a certain level of kind of realism as well. I quite like Suicide Squad. Hate me all you want, but Suicide Squad, I like BVS as well. I like the real world kind of philosophical discussions that BVS has. But where they try to move away from that, and they try to be more like MCU and try to make DC some weird world with Batman in a spider, like weird spider technology, In Justice League, he has the carrier, just like really unrealistic, unreal world technology, just weird, like you've got Cyborg with the bizarre motherboard, all of that kind of stuff. It's just not a real grounded world at all, right? It's very, very fantastical. And people have that in the MCU. They don't need DC to do that as well, right? So this is where I do agree with Zack Snyder. I agree with him a lot on this, but he just doesn't do it right. He doesn't. It's bad scripting, bad storytelling, bad whatever. Same with Wonder Woman 84. Once again, it's like you've got this great grounded Wonder Woman who's dealing with real world stuff, and it makes everything she does so emotionally impactful. And then you take her into this fake, false, weird 80s world that never existed, with characters that are cartoons, and it doesn't work. The grounded, and sure, you could say maybe this is Snyder's influence on the first Wonder Woman, that maybe Patty Jenkins wasn't let, loose, and, and she was trying to appease, this DC approach of more grounded movies at the time, but it made a much better, richer movie, mixing that with Patty Jenkins' kind of hopeful, optimistic take on the superhero. But putting that optimistic, whatever take on the superhero and putting it in a fantastical, bizarre, fake world of where people act like cartoon characters means it takes away the specialness of seeing Wonder Woman in reality, And again, the MCU does that really, really well. But we don't need to copy the MCU. And where DC movies have been strong critically and commercially is where they have had that opposite thing of putting these superheroes in somewhat realistic situations that are emotionally resonant for human beings in our world. The MCU, to me, is not emotional in that sense. I think the closest you had to a more grounded, realistic movie in the MCU was actually Iron Man 1, which really worked well, where you were dealing with, elements of terrorism, the Iraq War, weapons of, selling weapons to, and being irresponsible with the weapons industry and stuff like that. So, yeah, essentially, the point I'm making is that Zack Snyder's influence was good. He's on the DCU, and they shouldn't be trying to move away from Zack, because it has worked. That's the thing. Zack Snyder's formula for the DCEU has worked. It's worked with Shazam, it's worked with Joker, and it's worked with Wonder Woman. Where it hasn't worked, you could say maybe Aquaman. I don't like Aquaman. Where it definitely hasn't worked in terms of critical and commercial success, right, is Wonder Woman 84, Justice League. These are movies that, I'm sorry, I think Wonder Woman 84, if it went to, Patty Jenkins got a hell of a Hail Mary. That movie, even though I kind of appreciate aspects of it, to a younger audience, that movie does not play at all. That movie would have bombed big time. I think it would have been the biggest bomb in the DC so far. Commercially. No, in fact, it wouldn't, because it would have still beat Birds of Prey. Birds of Prey is another one in a world that is completely cartoonish, even though, it's supposedly a mature movie, in terms of the rating that it has. The character, everything is very cartoony. It doesn't strike you as a world that is real. None of the characters are dealing with anything that has any, emotional resonance or something grounded that, an audience can get into. It's a far off there alternative MCU style movie. It's like an adult MCU movie, Birds of Prey. and I didn't like it. I don't think it's good. Okay? So those movies failed. Wonder Woman 84 would have bombed hard, I think, right? Harder than even Zack Snyder's movies. The reason Zack Snyder's movies have a following, and the reason that people like aspects of it, and this is where I completely disagree with Jody, right? I think it's a terrible critique to make about the tone of the DC movies. The tone is fine because the DC movies that have worked, Shazam, Wonder Woman, Joker, critical, commercial successes, right? What do they have in common? Fantastical characters, real world. Zack Snyder failed. He didn't do that formula correctly. He took the fantasy out of Superman. Oh, sorry, and I should add to that, Batman Begins, Dark Knight Rises even. People love it. Fantastical character, real world. Okay, I think Batman, the Batman movie is going to be a wild success as well. Why? Fantastical character Batman, fantastical character Riddler, real world. Right? So Zack Snyder just didn't do it properly. The scripts weren't strong enough. The depictions of these characters were so far off what we expect Superman to be that people just didn't warm to it in the same way, right? Superman fans, it divided fans. But the reason lots of people really like the Zack Snyder movies, and rightly so, is because of the idea of putting these fantastical heroes in real world scenarios so that we can feel it more. And have the MCU over there being the cartoonish thing that it is, because they're doing that really, really well. But let DC do DC, right? Wonder Woman 84, again, as I said, you take away what made Wonder Woman great. Wonder Woman, fantastical character, grounded in a real world, big emotions. Because we can feel like, oh my God, it's almost like Wonder Woman walking through the World War One, stopping World War One, stopping this terrible event that happened in human history. You do not feel that about Captain America. At no point do you have the kind of big emotions, right, in the first Captain America movie that you have in Wonder Woman. Why is that? Because the first Captain America movie was a cartoon. It was a great cartoon. I loved it. I thought Red Skull could have been better, but it was a cartoon. It had lasers, Nazis with lasers. It wasn't even really the Nazis. It was, what's it called? Hydra. You didn't see Hitler or anybody who you would recognize from World War II. It was a cartoon. So when Captain America saving people, if that was Captain America saving actual, Jewish children from the Holocaust, you bet your bottom dollar there would have been tears in the audience if Captain America had done something badass and saved a bunch of children from, Nazis, doing this horrible stuff. I know that's a bit like World War II is a bit of a touchy one to do, because it's like you really have to do that well. It's not a joke, but it has been done before with like Magneto in the X-Men, right? So anyway, that's my kind of point on that. So I wanted to get into that. Now, I'm going to go and skip the video a bit too. I'll hear what it says for a bit longer.
Could that be? And these are the type of things that I've been saying. Yes, I'm loudmouth. Yes, I say Snyder's DC movies are trash all the time. Yeah, I have to do that because I hate those movies so much, because what it did was it put DC in the hole. because everybody's perception of the DC universe was a negative one. Unless you're a hardcore DC fan, or you're a huge DC fanboy, or if you're a Nolan or a Snyder fanboy, you didn't like DC and it was negative. Wonder Woman got the effects of that movie. I'll never forget how Patty Jenkins had a cold start. She had a negative 30-foot start from the start line because of what Snyder did to the universe. Nobody thought her film was going to be good. Lots of rumors came out.
That is true. That's very true. So do you know what? I'm going to cut this into parts because I don't want this to go on too long, but I've got a lot more to say about this kind of reaction. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to cut this into a part, and then in part 2, I'm going to discuss more about the Snyder cult and what Jody's saying about that, and give some kind of examples. This might even be in 3 parts because this is really kind of a massive thing that I really want to talk about. I want to talk about the Ray Fisher elements of what he's talking about and what Zack Snyder's doing in terms of influencing certain individuals to really divide and cause as much disruption as possible to the executives at DC. So let me finish this. So in the next one, we'll talk more about the Ray Fisher, more about the scandal at the center of this. All right. So it should be uploaded straight away. All right. So I'll be back in a minute. Please like and subscribe. And I'll be back in a minute with part 2. Oh, and comment. Please comment.